Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I am Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, February 20th, 2024. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about skills and the self. And what I mean by that is this idea that I've been having lately in my intensive work and my therapy work about what's the difference between the kind of transformational change that we go through and a kind of a skill-based approach or the differences that skills can make in our practice. So I'll be talking about that as we go. Before I get into that, just to remind you, for those of you that might be considerate, if you are an alumni of our Finding You program, you have the opportunity, then you qualify for the opportunity to go to what we call Returning to You, which is our sequel. So if you want to come back to get a reconnection, to get a recharge, to recalibrate and to check in with yourself, this is this offering. I'll share tonight. I just got done with my own 4.5 day intensive as a participant that I've done for many years with the same group of men, and it was one of the best weekends I've had in years. It was in years, and arguably, therapeutically speaking, it was one of the best weekends I've had in my life. So it doesn't matter how long you've been doing it, doesn't matter how far along in the work that you are, that practice of going back to yourself. Like I wrote in the Journey of the Heroic Parent, when I was talking about this idea, this process of returning to the work, I said, through this process of returning to you, I found myself again and again each week in my therapy sessions with my therapist. It's very difficult to find yourself until you are found by someone else, she told me. The root of ourself is almost always found through another person. When someone else finds us, we come to find ourselves. And when somebody else sits with us, that was my gratitude statement at the end of my intensive for my group members, for some of the other leadership that I spent some time with, and for our facilitator. My comment was, thank you for sitting with my horrible, rotten, insecure self. And because you sat with me this weekend, I now can sit with myself a little bit more. And I'll talk about that as we go along this evening. So with that, I'm going to not go into detail about the skills, but my two favorite presentations on skills, one is the 8 tools for connection, or the 8 tips for connection and relationships. I was asked many years ago, some of you have heard this, that somebody said, what are your top skills? And I came up with a list and pared it down to the ones that I found families and individuals who reported success in their therapeutic journey, having success in their therapeutic journey, what were the primary skills that they use? And I came up with these 8, speaking from an I statement perspective. In other words, talking about self. I feel, I think, this is what's going on for me. Reflective listening, being able to listen deeply, not to respond, but to understand the other person, was number 2. Number 3 was asking and stating the attention. If you are the speaker, to ask the other person what you need from them. Do you need to be heard? Do you want to problem solve? Do you want counsel? Do you want empathy? What is the ask? And if you're on the receiving end of a sharing, then before you respond, consider with anybody, partners, children, what do you want from me? What can I do for you? Do you want me to just listen? Do you want to problem solve? Do you want to hear examples of where I've had some success in this area? So asking or stating the intention is number 3, one of my favorites, probably, in my opinion, the most underutilized skill on this list. Number 4, I came up with avoiding imperatives, staying away from language like have to, must, should, ought to, good, bad, right, and wrong. These kind of absolutes, the shoulds in our energy tends to be a red light to close down communication. And really, what it does, those words tend to evoke defense in the other person, right? If we start to enter the field of good and bad and right and wrong, then we come up against the threat to the other person that if they are not good, if they are not right, if they are not, and pick your adjective, then they're not going to be worthy of connection. They're going to be rejected. They're going to be dismissed. They're going to be cast out of the group. So avoiding imperatives was number 4. Avoid polarizations. I think this one is pretty popular. Avoiding phrases like always, never, those kind of extreme kinds of words that describe a specific incident or a specific feeling. Those tend to, again, provoke or evoke the defense. Avoiding advice. It's my experience as a father, as a partner, as an employer, as really in all of my relationships as a therapist, that the less advice I give, the more I speak about it in terms of, this is what has worked for me. This is what I've struggled with, and where I've had success, it looks like this. It may or may not work for you. Again, is less likely to provoke the defense in the other person. Developing a practice of compassion toward self first, and then extending out from there towards others, and making sure, going on to quickly on to number 8, the 8th tool for connecting in relationships, when I am dysregulated, when I am incapable of reasoning, of listening, of showing compassion, can I have the courage then to remove myself to a practice of timeout, of taking a walk, of letting my nervous system settle? Because if I'm dysregulated, there's very little chance of connection. And I wrote this in the book, one of my books. I said, explaining how confronting defenses can serve to reinforce them or drive them, the underlying injury, further underground, only to reappear somewhere else in some other form. I advised a group of staff that I was training. We have to be with the client so that they feel safe enough to let down the wall. I don't confront justifying, I explain, but clients do it less. They justify less and less with me in my presence over time if I'm doing it well. I pointed to a poster on the wall during this presentation to this group of staff that I was training, pointing to the 8 tools that I've just read off to you and showed to you that are watching. I pointed to the list on the wall of 8 tools, um, and I said, those skills don't make you enlightened. But if you were enlightened, this is how it would sound. This would be your practice. And so I do believe in fake it till you make it. I do believe that a practice of discipline, a disciplined practice, can shape us and change us and help us to grow. I do believe that we can work from the outside in those ways. And so even the practice of the skill causes me pause. If I find myself saying should, and I remember that's a skill that I'm trying not to utilize, then the pause gives me the space to say, what am I really saying? What's the energy that I'm really feeling in my body towards this other person and toward the behavior that we're discussing? So I do believe in that. But I went on to say, they don't make you enlightened, but this is how you would sound if you were enlightened. In this way of being with another, it makes all the difference in the relationship. So I think skills can be helpful. Um, but also, I think the mistake is that people think that the skill is the thing, right? If you communicate appropriately, properly, using communication skills from myself, from others, if you use them properly, that you've crossed the threshold, right? You've gone over the line. You've made it over the hurdle. And there still might be an energy. I love what my daughter Emma says when she's doing coaching and facilitating intensive. She says, the problem with a skill-based approach is that the thing that is communicated in this process is really the energy. So when somebody asks me, what can I say to my spouse? What can I say to my child? I might give them an example of what it could sound like. But really what I'm saying is this is what the energy would sound like. If you felt this energy that we're describing, that you're trying to aspire to, this is what it would sound like. But of course, in many cases with my clients, in cases where I'm the client, even when my therapist offers an example of a suggestion, I hear it. I translate it in my head as I should. The right thing to do. And I forget that the outcome of the work is not what you get or what you learn to say. That comes for sure with it. But the outcome is the change that happens in you. The outcome is who you become in the process. I love this is probably again in an attempt to answer the question for people of what does it sound like, what does it look like? I also included this list in the Audacity to Be You. It's one of the things that I've said before. It's one of the few tools, the only tool, the only psychological reference I have anywhere in my house, hanging anywhere on display, is this list that I have on the screen today. It's the list between responding to the other, relating to the other, if you will. And what are the words, the phrases that communicate this kind of safety that I'm describing, where the person doesn't feel threatened, doesn't feel that threat of rejection, of being cast out. And what it sounds like is phrases like, thank you for telling me. Tell me more. I appreciate knowing. I'm glad you told me. Simply thanks. That sounds hard. I'm sorry. I'm here. I'm listening. You're not alone. That makes sense. Is there anything I can do? You must have a good reason. I would like to understand. What can I do to support you? I can relate. And again, I'm not saying that you have to say those words, and I'm not saying that this list is exhaustive, but can you feel what that sounds like? And then you contrast that with the list on the right side of the screen, the unsafe ideas, the unsafe words, the unsafe energy, and it sounds like these phrases, feels like these phrases. That's silly. You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. You're scaring me. You're being selfish. You should, and then fill in the blank. Don't pay them any mind. They're just jealous. Kind of dismissing the feeling. Ignore them. You'll get over it. Look on the bright side. Look at the silver lining. Why did you do that? That kind of shaming why question. That isn't really why did you do that, but why did you do that? That kind of energy. Have you tried this? Going quickly to solutions. One of my favorites, and by favorite, I mean, I think maybe the most insidious one, the one that I hear the most in relationships, in dynamics, in my own head, is the phrase, that wasn't my intention. And then, of course, the therapist version, the therapist list of favorites, it sounds like, well, that's your depression, that's your insecurity, that's your anxiety, that's your narcissism, your defense, your rationalization, your justification, right? Just simply labeling the defense, kind of attacking it. And again, to attack and point out somebody's defense doesn't tend to lower the defense. It tends to reinforce the defense. I was having an experience recently where I was training a therapist, and the first thing that he started doing was pointing out the body posture of somebody who felt guarded, the way that they were folding their arms. And right away, as he started to point those out, and he said, sometimes body posture tells us a little bit how we feel. And so, what are you feeling? And the individual, the gentleman that was on the other side of the equation, he didn't open up as a result of it. In fact, he got tighter and tighter, and eventually got to the place where he said to this therapist in training, he said, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I want to take a pause. I mean, it rose to that level. We can't just go around, as Jamie Gill says, tearing crutches away from people, pulling crutches away from people. The fact of the matter is, crutches take a lot of energy. The defense requires a lot of energy. And so instead of pulling away crutches and keeping a proud collection of all the people's crutches that we have torn away from them, we try to heal the injury. And when the injury is healed, the person will get rid of the crutches because it's easier. Not because they have to, not because they should, not because they're weak, not because it's unattractive to have crutches, but because it's easier to walk without them if you have no pain, if you have no energy that you're protecting. I wanted to share something tonight that is a little bit of a risk for me because it's so fresh, so recent. Like I said at the outset, I just finished a 4.5 day intensive, and I've been to this particular intensive somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 9 times with the same group of guys. And once I get into the circle, once I get into the work, I'm inside of my comfort zone. Like, I can do that pretty well. I can participate in therapy as a client. I can do exercises and activities. I can cry. I can, even though my heart beats quickly in my chest, I can show up and tell the truth and say something scary. That part I'm okay with. But for me, the challenging part was and has been the social time, the off time, standing around in circles around lunch or dinner, talking to people around the fire. And I've struggled with social anxiety. I think it was exacerbated during the pandemic, but I've always had some of it. And I always thought, well, I just don't like a lot of people. I'm an introvert, which those things are true. It's not mutually exclusive. But I entered campus. I joined the campus, and there were about 50 to 60 other participants. They were all professionals from my field. And I entered the campus, and I remembered, first of all, having an observer's mind. I was listening to the voice in my head. So it was there was a meditative or a mindfulness energy going in. And what I noticed was the way that I've coped with anxiety, social anxiety, for the vast majority of at least in recent years of my time is I'm not proud of this, but I look for something in somebody else and I compare myself to them. I find some way that I'm better, smarter, have more money, whatever it is. I find some way to put myself above them. And that positioning, that comparison, that I'm better, you're worse kind of comparison that I work on temporarily keeps at bay that insecurity that I feel in my body. That's my pattern. And I could have told you about this intellectually a week ago. Could have told you about this defense in general. Um, I might have even been able to tell you that I do it sometimes, but what happened was I walked on campus, and I don't like to tell lots of stories about where I have found success because I still have a long way to go. I don't want people to ever imagine that I've said I've arrived, but I will in this case share a successful weekend. I found myself walking around during the social times, and I was almost repeating the mantra, but it was just happening. And the mantra in my head was, I know myself. I know who I am. I know what I know, and I'm okay. I know myself, I kept saying. I know who I am. And with that energy, and again, it wasn't a skill. I wasn't consciously practicing the mindfulness, but with that feeling in my body that I can only attribute that has come from years of psychotherapy, right? From the work that I've done. Um, I didn't care about anybody else's faults or successes. I wasn't threatened by their successes. I wasn't artificially pumping myself up because I saw somebody who might not know something that I know or say something that I would say in a certain situation. I just loved everybody. And when people were themselves, I was comfortable. I was comfortable just being me. And if I said something and somebody had a reaction to it, I realized, again, it wasn't the skill. I realized that's just because they can't see it. If I shared a truth, an authentic truth, and I did my very best to be connected, to stay connected, to hold on to my authentic self. Lost it a couple of moments here and there, but for the most part, I was successful in holding on to who I was and telling my truth, even through a racing heart rate in my chest. If people couldn't see it or hear it, it didn't re-wound me. I didn't feel like, oh, these guys are stupid and these people are stupid. I realized if I shared something, it doesn't fit for them. They don't see it. Doesn't apply. For them, it doesn't make sense. It had nothing to do with me. I could see them, you see, because I was holding on to me, because I was knowing myself and holding on to that. I could see them, and their reactions weren't anything about me, one way or the other. And I had the greatest experience at this intensive, and like I said, I've been there somewhere around 8 or 9 times that I've ever had in my life. Got the most joy out of it. Enjoyed the speakers, the facilitators, my group members, which I usually always enjoy, but the social time, the extended group, the lectures, I took what fit and also didn't feel this urge to constantly be seen as worthy, seen as important, seen as valuable. But it wasn't because I was trying not to feel that way, trying not to do that. It was because through the work, I was able to hold on to myself throughout the 4.5 days. So why do skills fail? Because what is being communicated underneath all of it is the energy. I've been quiet. I don't go around insulting people. I just keep it in my head. I walked into the gym this morning. I got home last night from the intensive. I walked into the gym. I work out in a group process, Orange Theory, for those of you that might know it. And I work out there, and usually I keep my head down. I stay quiet, and I was unburdened. I was just seeing and greeting people. And it wasn't going crazy, but I was just seeing and greeting people, talking to people, asking how they were doing, playful, light banter, small little connections. Because what is really being communicated underneath all of it is the energy. My wife said to me after all of this, she said, maybe that's why some people have accused you of being arrogant in the past. And because I've never, sometimes, sometimes that does make sense to me, but sometimes it doesn't because I've said to her, I'm not arrogant. I'm over there scared to death. I'm over there trying to survive my social anxiety. That's my experience in my head. But I think what my wife pointed out and what I noticed was that energy of comparison, that energy of inflation to protect myself, that's the energy that people were feeling. Even if I was wordless in our interaction, even if my head was staring at the ground in my interactions, they could feel that energy off me. And I'm not a big energy guy. I wrote not some mystical energy, not some psychobabble energy, but unconsciously we communicate to the other person. Even if they are not conscious of the communication, we communicate to them and they receive the message in the process. And so it was one of my favorite weekends of all time. I borrowed this next image. This is going to be a hard one to explain orally unless you're watching the video screen. You can always watch these. You can always ask for copies of the slides by emailing webinar at evoketherapy.com. Or you can also watch the rebroadcast of the video versions of these on Evoke Therapy Program's YouTube channel. But I borrowed this image from the Eden Project by James Hollis, my favorite book on marriage, on coupling that I've ever read. And he talks about this idea that the unconscious of one person communicates to the unconscious of another. The unconscious of one person communicates to the consciousness of another. Like we can read people consciously. We can read their energy and their vibes. We can sense through what I imagine is millions, maybe more of small little verbal cues, the way that they hold their body, the way that their weight shifts, the expression, the micro expressions on their face, the choice of words, the stutter, the pause. We can sense the energy that's going on. So we have to account for all of this energy. We have to look into this. That's why tonight's broadcast is about, yes, there are skills. And I love to teach skills, and I love skills on top of this kind of self-awareness, this kind of transformation of consciousness, as Joseph Campbell calls it, the deepest kind of work of therapy, the second order of change, sometimes it's referred to, as opposed to the first order, which is just behavioral. There is this, you can build the skills on top of that change, but deeper than that, it's the work. It's going into the unconscious. I think a lot of therapies focus on what we see and know consciously. And what I've come to know, and this weekend reinforced in ways so powerful, don't want to, but can't dismiss them, can't ignore them. The fact of the matter is we either do our work and heal, we either address our trauma, or we will inevitably communicate it. And there were definitely people at times in interactions that were communicating their trauma to me and to us. That was happening at times in some of the settings, for sure. No doubt about it. In the therapy process, that's what we were supposed to be doing. So that was welcome. But I mean, in the other kinds of settings, the casual settings, the discussion settings, some of the lecturing settings, there were people communicating their trauma and they didn't know that they were doing it. They didn't know that they were communicating their trauma and asking an audience of therapy participants to hold it. And again, I hold no malice toward them because we all do it. Just like I confessed tonight about my social anxiety, I've been doing it for most of my life in this way. I wrote this, I said, become conscious. That's the thing. Become conscious. Become more conscious. Everything else will fall into place. But to become conscious, you must learn to love and accept the parts of you that people in your history found unacceptable. If you don't, the ego will reject it. It comes at too great of a cost. If you have this ego that's still protecting you, you can't see things about yourself. You have to find a story where you're the good guy and not the bad guy, right? That's the story that we tell in these kind of conflictual interactions. I wrote on my social media today, if the story in your mind ends or concludes with you being the good one, the good guy, you're back at the beginning. You have to learn to sit quietly by the stream, as it were, in front of the mirror. In our therapy sessions, in our 12-step groups, we have to learn to sit quietly long enough until the stream is able to give us a true reflection of who we are, meaning how we can see ourselves. And to do that, we have to grapple with shame and guilt. Jung taught that the greatest burden our child or our partners can bear is our unlived lives. This is what he meant. This means that if we don't learn to own who we are, not the pretty parts, not the wonderful parts. I have talents, I have gifts. You do too. Every human being does. Those for most of us are pretty easy to pay attention to. I clung to those during moments of social anxiety for just some life raft, right? We have to learn to love our whole self, including the bad, selfish, ignorant, or unhealed parts. If we don't do that, we'll project them onto others, onto the important people in our lives in the form of disappointment, criticism, or anger. We will look to find fault in them. We will look to blame them for the feeling that we're having because we don't want to grapple with it. That's what the ego does. The work is to see, own, and grapple with who we are. So we don't ask others to do the ego's bidding. That is to protect us from who we are. When Jung further said, I would rather be whole than good, he was encouraging us to accept who we are. It's the disowned devils, he explained. It's the disowned devils, the parts of ourselves that we can't accept, can't look at, that wreak all the havoc in this world. If we don't take on our devils, if we don't take them on ourselves, we'll project them out onto others. This is the source of all the wars that have ever been fought. I've told the story before. This is that moment when my mother came up to me after a talk I'd given and said, I think I should maybe feel bad for some of the way I raised you and your brothers. And I said, I can't get you to stop feeling bad. That's yours to deal with. But it'd be nice if you knew the mistakes you made, could own them, could make an amends, especially for my brothers who haven't been to therapy. And I went on to say, I know it feels like you should feel bad. I know you've been taught to feel bad for the mistakes, the humanity, the imperfectness. That's what the entire Barbie movie was about. You were taught to feel bad for being human. You were taught that it was unacceptable to have this or that flaw, this or that feeling, this or that limitation. And so I said to her, and she couldn't hear it, but I said to her, so I think you might have to understand that the guilt and the shame aren't going to help you see what you did. They're going to prevent you from seeing what you did. That's what I mean by this. I had a friend, I came home and shared some of this experience just as I've shared it with you tonight, talking about the aspect of social anxiety and what I've been doing. And he's not a therapy client, but he started to say to me, he'd been through a really disciplined and long practice of meditation where he asked himself questions. He said, I was unhappy for a lot of years. And I was tired of being unhappy. And I wasn't really finding any peace, any serenity. So I just started asking myself who, what, where, when, why, how. And I would just do that. And he said, I bumped up against the ego. It was terrifying. Some of the answers were not pleasant. Some of the answers were to discover that I was the cause of the problem. I was the cause of my own unhappiness. I was the cause of this conflict. I had hurt this person. I was not the victim, and so forth and so on. And so in his meditation practice, through a different medium than what I'm describing to you often, which is psychotherapy, he found this same kind of awareness. But he had to get past the sentinels of shame and guilt. They are there to protect the ego, the feelings of unworthiness. They are there to rewrite the story that we're a good person, that we have good intentions, that we didn't mean any harm. But we have to get past that. I've told the story many times about being on Judith Regan's radio show, Sirius XM radio show, during a large broadcast where she had all of her favorite guests. And I missed her question and I kept talking about myself and trying to, I was so anxious. I fell into this narcissistic pattern of trying to impress everybody. And in so doing, I ignored everybody else. I couldn't even see them. Couldn't even, when I listened to myself after it was published, I didn't even answer her question because I couldn't hear it, because I had this speech plan that I was going to give regardless. And I'm sure people's experience of me was, this guy's off. Maybe some of them. My wife on the way out just said to me, in love, she really did say it in love. She said, "What was that?" And I said, "Was it bad?" And she's like, "What were you doing? What was happening?" And I said, "I was scared. I didn't think I belonged. I didn't think I fit in." And she's like, "Yeah, you were talking about yourself. You interrupted somebody else's story to tell something about you." And she made a couple of other gentle observations. And I came home a couple of days later. That was in New York City. I came home a couple of days later, had my therapy session, and I confessed this story to my therapist. And I started to feel, you know how you do that when you tell a story like this and you cringe at the shame of it, you re-experience the shame of it. And I said to her, I just want to hide. I don't want to do that. I want to stop. And of course, in her wonderful, gentle, intelligent way, she said, instead of running away from it and hiding, maybe it's time to face it. Maybe you could write about it. She said, and I bet if you wrote about it, people could relate to it. You wouldn't be so alone in it. So I wrote a blog about it. It's published on my own website. It's called Feeling Small and Showing Up Anyway. So and since that moment when I, instead of running away from it, which is what shame tells us to do, to fight it or to run away from it, instead of doing that, I leaned into it. I went through it. Now, when I find myself trying to impress people at a dinner party or in a social situation, I can more effectively sit with myself, right? Like I said at the outset, sit with myself and realize it's just the scared kid who doesn't think that he's worthy of love. And I talk to him. You're okay. You're okay. You know who you are. I'm here for you. I love you. And with that kind of compassionate lean in to the wound, not to the symptom, to the wound, I'm able to be present with myself and then present in a much more connected and compassionate way toward others. I wrote this, if you don't accept and deal with who you are, if you don't accept and deal with who you are, not who you want to be, not who you hope to be, but who you are, you'll continue to hurt yourself or those that you love. We have to at some point come to terms with ourselves. Like I've shared with you recently, when it was a couple of weeks ago, when I confessed something, some dynamic, some stupid thing that I'd done in my marriage or my family. I can't remember what it was. And I said to my therapist, I don't really need to talk about it. I need to take care of myself better. I'm the buffoon in the story. And she said to me, the news just gets worse and worse. That's the thing about psychotherapy, she said, the news just gets worse and worse. I just laughed a belly laugh. The news just gets worse and worse. And of course, it gets worse and worse because my nervous system, my attachment trauma is healing over the years. And so I can see it. And when I can see it, I can tend to it. I can tend to the loss of the scared child. Nobody likes feeling afraid, anxious, hurt, or insecure. But here's the thing. If you don't feel and deal with those feelings, you'll project them onto your partner and your children in the form of anger and criticism. The parent who is not seen in childhood, which is a lot of us, will often try to fix it, trying to be the better parent than their parents were, the good parent that their parents were to the child. But in this effort of trying to be the good parent, that's the ego's word, right? To be good. In this effort to be good, the parent then seeks validation from the child, and the child goes unseen again. The child is left with the dilemma of either I take care of my parents' ego or I get abandoned. That's the unlived life. If we don't deal with our trauma, and I'm not talking about the big T stuff. I think that goes almost without saying. I'm talking about the small T, soup that we were cooked in, air that we breathed, way that it was in our family. The kind of safe versus unsafe stuff that I was talking about in the beginning, that's the trauma that's affecting us. That's the stuff that's shaping our personality. The outcome of therapy is not what you get, but who you become. And who is that, you might ask? You become yourself. You become yourself in this process. And when that happens, as or when you become yourself, there's no need for the defense anymore. There's nothing to protect. There's no need to protect from the threat of being loved or abandoned because you've made peace with your horrible, rotten self, or with the parts of yourself that you were told were horrible and rotten. They aren't. They're just human parts of you. This is place of this connection to self. This is called home. This is the real self. And contact with this real self contains all that you've been looking for. As the poet Rumi said it, the desire to know your own soul will end all other desires. James Hollis said, "This is the thing I learned in my years of analysis in Zurich." He did analysis at the Jungian Institute. This is what I learned in my years, the thing I learned most in my years in analysis in Zurich. I've seen it play out time and time again. It's a strange paradox. And it's even threatening. You see, it's even threatening. It's even demoralizing. But the strange paradox is basically that what I have become is my chief obstacle. Who I am is the thing I have to deal with. Who I am is the thing that stands in the way between me and for that peace and that serenity, that home, that heaven, that connection to the divine that I'm looking for. That feeling that I think all of my self-medicating behaviors and all of my accomplishments is going to give me. That thing that I say to myself, when this happens, then I'll be happy. If this person just wasn't this way, then I could be happy. If my child just wasn't struggling, then I could be happy. If I got a bigger paycheck, if I lost a few more pounds. Those can, just like my comparison that I did with my social anxiety, those can temporarily stave off the experience of the threat of I'm not good enough. But in the end, it doesn't get the job done. I'm a huge fan of the Barbie movie. I'm a huge fan of any movie that's a good hero's journey and doesn't get much better than the Barbie movie. So I wrote this on my flight home. In the Barbie movie, we celebrate Barbie choosing to be human over being good. We celebrate her choice, her victory. We feel it at the end. The music changes, right? It looks like she's walking into heaven, so to speak. But do we really understand the cost that is being asked? In its climax, it is amazing. Getting to the other side, being crowned at the end of Star Wars or The Lord of the Rings is a wonderful symbolic moment of what it feels like when we cross the threshold. Find ourselves. That's what all of those are about. Find our human selves. Usually represented in mythology by some kind of celebration or coronation. Some new attribute. It's like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, right? It was in you all along. That's what the message is. In its climax, it's amazing. We see and feel what it looks like, feels like to get to the other side. But looking at the cast of characters she had to break free of, which represented the dominant culture, the messages from her family of origin, the shoulds and the shouldn'ts, the rights and the wrongs. Looking at the cast of characters, that is to break free of the dominant culture from what was held to be good and right and true. That is the painful part of the hero's journey. That is where the dragon battle takes place. That is the dragon battle. In our move away from good and bad to the real self, which is life, which is the divine. In our move away from good and bad to the real self, it is lined. The path is lined with hellfire and damnation. And during this part of the hero's journey, the hero must face his or her deepest fears. Principally, the fear of being cast out, abandoned, and left for dead. But yes, on the other side of that war, the sun comes up with all that we were seeking. And we come to the heavenly home that we call ourselves. That is the conclusion. That is the process that we do over and over again. That is finding you. That is returning to you. I love this book, The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. Boyd Vardy says this: becoming who we are. Well, there's a couple of quotes. This first one is from a Jungian psychotherapist by the name of Michael Mead. Becoming who we are requires the greatest amount of change, he says. It is a radical act of rebellion. And Boyd Vardy says, a person who is living in the authentic wild self becomes a transformer. not by what they do, but by the very realness of their life that asks to switch on. In these times, an authentic life infused with meaning is a kind of activism. Here's the thing, mom and dad, spouse, husband, wife, partner. Here's the thing. The mistake isn't the problem. Everybody makes it. I shared with one of my friends this weekend something he had done that had hurt me. I did it from a place of love. I did it knowing that the chance was that it might not go well. I was scared, but I spoke my truth kindly and clearly. And not only did he apologize easily, but he owned where it came from, that it had nothing to do with me. It was being activated by some other trauma in his context, in his life, in his history. And once he did that, we were good. We were connected. I saw him in his pain, and he saw me in my pain and my process. So the mistake isn't the problem. I promise you this. If our children need us to be perfect, if our spouses need us to be perfect or good, they're all doomed. We're all doomed. Like the epigraph of the Audacity of You says, why were each of us taught the notions of being correct when that very notion ensured our failure in the world? It's not the mistake. It's not the misstep. It's not the snap, the yell, the failure, the lie, the whatever it is. It's the ego that defends it. It's the inability to sit with that part of ourselves and to own it. To be accountable, not in a you have to be accountable kind of way, to be accountable for it that I brought this fear, this sadness, this energy in. I wrote this, what our children may struggle most with is our egos. When their need to express hurt or anger comes up against our defenses, that's where the real wound occurs. That's what I see over and over and over again in our intensive work. When people go back in time and have this metaphorical role play kind of discussion with their family of origin, with their parents, almost invariably, almost always, most of the time, the when I ask what would your parents say to this, if you went back and told them about your hurt, about your sadness, about your anger, your frustration, almost always they imagine their parents to say, you're making a big deal out of nothing. You're imagining this. You had a good childhood. I was a good father. I was a good mother. I was a good parent. The most common message, folks, the most common message that is carried through and in dysfunctional families is this: the parents are good. That's what Jung was referring to. That the child, if the child is raised by a parent who hasn't done the work to deal with who they are, to own it, just to own it. My anger is mine. My sadness is mine. My fear is mine. If a parent can't learn to own that, and even the ways that I protect myself against those feelings are my responsibility. Yes, it came from my context. Yes, it came from my history. It wasn't my fault that it happened to me, but it is my responsibility to myself first and to the children that I have decided to raise. It is my responsibility to take on that burden myself and to heal it. That is the work. So yes, there are questions, there are skills, there are things that we can talk about for sure, and we can explain this, but the work is, and the attachment literature is clear and comprehensive on this. That the foundation of the secure attachment with a child, which is the foundation of the child's sense of self and resiliency, is dependent almost solely on the parent's willingness and ability to look back and look at themselves, to see how they are wounded, to see what they're carrying in their bodies and their psyche, to see how they protect themselves against the threat. Like Alice Miller says, most of our defenses are an attempt to prevent something that already happened. And that the grandiose, the narcissistic person, I'm not talking about the classical narcissist, I'm talking about the narcissistic wound in all of us. Dr. Miller explains, without psychotherapy, it's almost impossible to cut the tragic link between love and admiration, right? We think if I can just show up and show everybody how bright and shiny and sparkly I am, they'll love me. But if that were true, all of the bright and shiny, sparkly people that we know publicly would be happy, and we know that they're not. And all the people that struggle and live a very plain life would be unhappy, and that's not true either. So this is an invitation. Tonight's broadcast is not an effort to solve the problem. It is an invitation to work on the problem. It's an invitation to go into the pain, as Rumi says. The solution for the pain is in the pain. The solution for the shame is in the shame. Your child's behavior that brought you to this, your struggling marriage that brought you to this broadcast, whatever it is that brought you here. It's not to fix or wrap those things. It's to go into them and discover what dilemmas, what unlived parts of yourself, what unrealized wounds and traumas are you carrying in your body? What way of being needs to be unlearned and deprogrammed in the process? So it's an invitation to just keep going, but to know that you don't have to go alone. I'll be with you on these broadcasts. You can find a therapist who's more classically trained that can go with you on this process. You can go to the 12-step groups that I'm going to talk about in a moment. You can find good books by people who know what it's like to do this work, who'll go with you. You can find community where others are struggling this perilous journey back home. I hope that was a helpful idea. It was a little bit abstract. I hope it was helpful. I'll go over the upcoming announcements and stuff. The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You are available on Amazon and Audible. You can check them out there. Our next intensive starts on March 20th. If you want to attend, if you want to springboard into your own work or want a therapy accelerator, March 20th through 24th is that next offering. Wednesday evening, Wednesday afternoon to Sunday afternoon, all inclusive, a beautiful inn outside of Park City, Utah, and we will take you through this healing journey. We'll hold you. If you want to do it online, if time and money are scarce, then an online intensive can be that offering. It's about a third of the price, half the time. And it's a great way to get a lot of work. We started during the pandemic. I was skeptical myself. And after doing one, and I did several, after doing one, I thought we're going to keep doing this. Always. If you want to, like I said, come back to this returning to you. March 6th through 10th is that offering. We have custom programs for families. We call them Finding Family. We have custom programs for couples and co-parents. We call those Finding Connection. Just contact intensives@evoketherapy.com or go to our website. We have support groups weekly for our wilderness families and alumni. The next offering is February 22nd. That's Thursday night at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting of our wilderness clients' families. And that next offering is March 18th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And then for our intensives and coaching clients and alumni, the next support group for you is March 11th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Contact support groups at evoketherapy.com for more information to find out more to sign up. We have coaches that are available. Again, I think that one of the best signs of successful therapy or even a successful intensive or an intervention is that people want more. They want that feeling of being seen, of being heard, of being understood. So if you're interested in that, we have a host of a wide range of coaches and therapists trained in the attachment-based work that we do here at Evoke. Just contact coaching@evoketherapy.com to sign up with one of our coaches. We have 12-step support groups that we encourage. We don't have them. We encourage all of our clients to just try them. They're free. You can do them online and in person. I encourage you to go in person if you can. But if you can't for any reason, you can find them online. The ones that we recommend are Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also go to RefugeRecovery.org, a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, and the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, has free classes and resources in your local communities. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app, wherever you consume podcasts, or Spotify. Just search Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there. You can find us on Evoke's YouTube channel and watch the rebroadcast of these, the video versions of these. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can find the Evoke Intensives program on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives on Facebook. You can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, check out our wonderful blog written by all of our staff about their own personal hero's journey, their own personal growth journey in this process. All right, folks, I hope this is a helpful point of contact. My next broadcast, I'll take any questions left over from tonight, any questions that always get mailed in anytime to webinar@evoketherapy.com. You can always send them in. They'll go to the top of the queue. The next broadcast will be 2 days from now, Thursday night, February 22nd at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. You can invite family and friends, siblings of clients, and people that you want to share this work with. Thanks for joining me. And most importantly, on behalf of the people that you love, people that are important to you, and the people that love you, thanks for showing up to something like this and being willing to do your work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.